I heard them getting that music ready. I thought it was the Russian national anthem at the beginning, but it's not. It's a beautiful carol. And between Christmas and New Year, we're discussing various issues. We have a complete show on religion, another complete show on foreign affairs, and this one devoted to the Middle East, various aspects of the Middle East, Iran, Egypt, the influence of Islam, general politics. But what does 2012 have in store for Israel, the lone non-Muslim state in the region? Steve MacDonald is from the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs. Welcome to you.
Thanks, and Merry Christmas. Are we still allowed to say that on the air? Or?
It's compulsory here. We have to say Merry Christmas. Even in July, I'm going to say Merry Christmas.
Excellent.
It's on the way. Now, the history, the origins of, I've met people who, it makes me very angry. They think that Israel is this colonial state, dumped in a region, no connection to it. The Jewish people, the origins are here. They were dispersed for a long time, but I think it's a wonderful example of the restoration of an indigenous people, the rebirth of the country in 1948. Would you concur?
I would. I mean, we have a continuous presence of Jews in Israel for hundreds and hundreds of years. The first major reclaiming that you're speaking of took place from the 1880s onward. When it was under the British mandate, the British government declared that it supports the idea of a Jewish national home in Israel. And from there, we do have the final declaration of the State of Israel in 1948, which took place in the midst of a war declared by the surrounding Arab states on the Jewish population there. Israel won that war and has been able to sustain itself, even in the face of very serious security threats ever since that point.
Now, when we look back to 1948, in fact, right up to, I'd say, the early 1970s, the position of the left was generally very pro-Israel. The Social Democratic Party is the left, the labor movement, great support for Israel. They've now moved in the opposite direction, which I think shows that their ideas are not consistent. They seem to have very little knowledge of why Israel is there. It must be irritating, though, to be an advocate for Israel and see this ignorance and this hatred.
Well, it is a bit frustrating because there are some on the left, not all, but some on the left who do have this position, this anti-Zionist position, when in fact Israel is, without question, the most liberal state in the entire region. In fact, Israel is liberal by Canadian and by Western standards. You've been to Tel Aviv, you know that
many times.
Tel Aviv's a dynamic liberal
Sodom
place.
And Gomorrah, sir.
Well, I mean, depends on your perspective, but I mean...
No, it's a very happening, thriving party city where pretty much everything and anything goes, yes.
For sure. It is a Western place. In fact, it's the only region where Canadian and North American and European leftists can go and openly protest. They can fly into Ben Gurion Airport and protest anywhere they want, for that matter, without fear of violence being committed against them. Well, the worst that'll happen is you're going to be sent home.
Tel Aviv, and I mean, it's a beautiful city, but Tel Aviv has for example, a thriving gay scene.
Absolutely, yes.
Now, there are some Orthodox Jews who don't approve of that, but they're told by the Supreme Court, you can disapprove of it, but I'm afraid the law allows this. And you have Palestinians, I've met several of them, who leave their home to come to Tel Aviv, or sometimes to Haifa, because it's the only place they can be free and open. Yet we have gay people in Canada protesting at the fascism of Israel.
For sure. I mean, and it's interesting you bring that up because I did read a BBC report it's from a few years back about the fact that dozens of gay Palestinians have fled to Israel seeking refuge and are living and working there. I think this goes to an interesting shift, and I've mentioned it on your show before, in the concept of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism merging with that. If you look at it in the past, take the term Jew, for example. Jew is not a loaded term. Jew is a descriptive term like Catholic or blonde. But Jew was used as a derogatory term by those who hate Jews. It was claimed as a term. If you look today, they're doing, those who hate the Jewish state are doing the same thing to the term Zionist. They're using it and throwing it in the face of Israel's supporters as a term to be ashamed of. You're a Zionist, so but de facto you're wrong. When in fact Zionist is an empty term. It simply is the position that Israel has a right to exist. How large Israel should be, what its policy should be, has nothing to do with the term Zionist itself. And so I do think we have a very interesting phenomenon that some on the far left have bought into this anti-Zionist position because of perhaps ignorance, but also because it's part of a constellation of issues, whether it's anti-Americanism, whether it's pro-globalize or pro-EU, getting rid of international borders, and de facto anti-nation state.
My experience, for what it's worth, has been that within the West, there's a very limited anti-Semitism as such. Now, in the Islamic world, that can be different, but it's on the edges. There's a certain tinge of it, perhaps. But there's massive ignorance of the history of the conflict. There's a great deal of anti-Americanism, and Israel is seen, wrongly, as being this puppet of the United States, and American influence in the region. And there's also the notion that, well, Mum and Dad supported Israel, so I don't. It's a friend of Christianity. I don't like religion and Christianity very much. And a massive refusal to acknowledge that Islam is a possible threat. Now, all these combine, and you throw a little bit of Jew hatred in, and that, you know, spices the whole thing up a little. But generally, when Jewish people say it's all anti-Semitism, I think it's more layered than that.
It absolutely is, and I think that the key distinction is whether someone is criticizing Israel's policies, whether they hold Israel up to standards that you would, not standards in the region, but standards that you would Western countries, and whether you're using terms that condemn Israel. So when you use terms such as comparing Israel to Nazis or calling it an apartheid state, you're instantly shutting down debate when you do that. You're saying that Israel, if it is a Nazi state, it has to go, because you can't abide by a Nazi state.
I mean, you're a convert to Judaism, but you take your faith very seriously and your Zionism very seriously. Ireland, for example, there's a very strong anti-Zionist movement in Ireland. Now, I've heard Irish people referring to Israel as a Nazi state. Ireland was neutral in the Second World War. They lowered the Irish tricolour to half-staff when Hitler killed himself. De Valera sent a telegram of condolences to the German embassy in Dublin. The IRA was trying to blow up British targets while they were fighting the Nazis. And to have Irish nationalists in particular say, Israel a Nazi state, makes me just a little bit angry.
It's bizarre because Ireland is an example of the idea of national self-determination.
Exactly.
Israel is the ultimate example of national self-determination. You know, Israel doesn't expect to be treated any differently than any other democratic state in the world. It holds itself up to high standards, as does Canada, as does the United States for that matter. Israel simply wants the world to recognize that it has a right to exist, and the world has a right to criticize its policies, but not in gross disproportion to the policies of any other democracy.
You know, it's rather strange in a way that a book that was given to active members of the IRA in the, I suppose it would be the 50s, was Menachem Begin's book, The Revolt.
Interesting.
They gave them that book to learn how the struggle would be. So let's talk about the future here. Long term, everyone has various theories about this. Of course, Iran is an issue, but there's something more than that. It's whether Israel has a long-term future. I think it can take care of itself very well. But will it internally distract? Are enough Israelis saying, you know what, I've had enough of this. I want to leave, I want to go beyond. I love my country, but I just want to have fun.
Well, that's a great question. I was actually in Israel just a few weeks ago on my honeymoon, and it really reminded me of how dynamic this country is and how dynamic its people is. I find that people in the West tend to mythologize Israel. Yeah. They tend to depict it as either super heroic and it can do no wrong and it's perfect, or they depict it as super villainous and incapable of any good. The fact is, it's neither. It is an extraordinary place with an extraordinary history, but it's a place of imperfect people. And those people draw closer at times, they become more divided at times, but they're ultimately pretty happy. And there was an interesting survey done over Rosh Hashanah a couple months back by one Israeli paper that found that the vast majority, approximately 3/4 of Israelis, consider themselves quite happy. And Israelis see themselves as having a strong future and a strong future for their kids in that country. And so I think it's something that everyone who supports Israel can be proud of, that despite the security threats, there is a very highly functioning, open, outward, forward-thinking country that's in existence there.
Nice way to end the interview. Thank you very much.
Thanks.